The night my sister got promoted to partner at her law firm, my family made sure everyone at the celebration dinner knew exactly what they thought of me. Not in a cruel, dramatic way. That would have almost been easier. It was the kind of dismissal that happens in small, quiet cuts. The kind you can't point to without sounding oversensitive. A glance across the table when someone asked what I was up to lately. My mom's voice dropping half a note when she mentioned my name, the way it does when she's trying to sound neutral but isn't. My dad pivoting the conversation back to my sister before I'd finished a sentence. I had driven 2.5 hours to be there. I remember sitting in the parking lot of the restaurant for about 4 minutes before going in, just staring at the steering wheel, telling myself it would be fine. It wasn't bad. It was just exactly what I'd expected, which somehow felt worse. The restaurant was the kind of place my family liked. White tablecloths, a wine list that got handed to my dad automatically, soft lighting that made everyone look more successful than they felt. My sister had made the reservation. She texted me the address 3 times, which was her way of making sure I came. She knew I sometimes found reasons not to. I found a seat near the end of the table, next to my aunt and her husband, a quiet man named Frank who mostly talked about fishing. That was fine. I liked Frank. He never asked what I did for work in the tone people use when they already don't think much of the answer. My sister arrived with her boyfriend. I'll call him her boyfriend, even though they'd been together for 6 years, and the word felt increasingly strange, but that's its own story. His name was Patrick. He worked in finance. He had the kind of easy confidence that came from never really having been told no in a way that stuck. Not a bad person. Just someone who moved through the world like it had been arranged for him in advance. He pulled out her chair. She laughed at something he said before they even sat down. I watched my mom's face when they walked in, the way her whole expression opened up, like a window being unlatched. I looked back at my water glass. The dinner started. Wine was poured. My sister talked about the partnership, what it meant, the cases she'd been on, the late nights, the moment her name partner called her into his office. She told it well. She always had. I was proud of her, genuinely. That part wasn't complicated. What was complicated was the moment my dad raised his glass and said, "To Elaine, who never gave up, who always pushed through, who made something of herself." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. My aunt reached over and patted my hand. I don't know if she meant it as comfort or if she just wanted something to do with her hands, but it landed like a small, apologetic weight. I kept my face still. I'd had a lot of practice at that. The thing about being the one in the family who didn't follow the expected path is that after a while, people stop asking what path you're on. They've already decided. The story about you gets fixed somewhere around your mid-20s, and then it just plays on a loop. She never finished that degree. She moves around a lot. She does something with computers, I think. We're not really sure. She seems fine, but there was always a but. I hadn't finished my MBA, true. I'd left in the 2nd year when I got a contract that made the tuition feel like a liability instead of an investment, which was a decision I'd made with a spreadsheet and a clear head, not out of carelessness. But that's not how it got told at family dinners. At family dinners, it was, she dropped out. I'd moved 3 times in 4 years, also true. Once for a client, once for a contract that tripled my previous rate, once because I wanted to. But in family shorthand that became, she can't settle down. She doesn't know what she wants. I'd been quiet about what I actually did because I'd tried explaining it twice and watched people's eyes glaze somewhere around the 2nd sentence, so I stopped trying. I answered vaguely and changed the subject and let the story about me continue to play. Sitting there that night, I thought about how strange it was to be a mystery in your own family. Not because you're hiding something, but because no one's ever really tried to find out. Patrick's older sister, Ren, was at the dinner too. I'd met her once before, briefly at Christmas 2 years ago. She worked in some kind of consulting role. I caught a fragment of conversation but hadn't gotten the full picture. She had one of those faces that seemed like it was always paying attention, even when she was quiet. She'd been placed at my end of the table, maybe because she was the least central to the celebration and the table had to be arranged somehow. Halfway through the main course, she leaned over and refilled her water glass, and then, almost as an afterthought, looked at me. I keep meaning to ask, she said. What do you do? Not in the tone people use when they're being polite, in the tone people use when they actually want to know. I almost gave my usual answer. Something general, something that wouldn't require follow-up. But I don't know. Maybe it was the drive down or the moment with my dad's toast still sitting in my chest, or just the fact that she'd ask like she meant it. I told her. I do infrastructure optimization, I said, mostly for mid to large-scale distribution networks. Basically, when a company's supply chain is costing them more than it should or breaking down in ways they can't trace, I come in and find where. She set down her water glass. Which companies? She asked. I named a few. I kept my voice level. I wasn't performing, I was just answering the question. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, Wait, are you the one who did the restructuring for Callaway Freight last spring? I said yes. She put her fork down. That was you? I nodded. We've been studying that restructuring, she said. Her voice had shifted, not louder, but more focused, the way voices get when something unexpected has happened and the person is still processing it. I work in logistics consulting. We used that Callaway case in 3 separate client presentations. The turnaround timeline was, that's not a normal result. We were trying to figure out who was behind it for months. I didn't say anything for a moment. There wasn't much to say. That was a good project, I said finally. The founder was willing to actually implement the recommendations, which doesn't always happen. Ren laughed, slightly stunned. That's an understatement. The thing is, we weren't being loud. We were having a fairly normal conversation, the way 2 people at a dinner table have conversations. But the table wasn't that long, and my mother has always had very good hearing when she wants to. I noticed her attention shift before I saw her turn. The way her shoulders changed first. Then she looked down the table at me, and at Ren, and back at me. What are you 2 talking about? She asked. Lightly, the way she asks things when she's trying to sound casual. Ren looked at her, then at me. There was a small pause, the kind where the other person is trying to read how much you want. Said. I didn't give her a signal either way. I just picked up my wine glass, so Ren answered honestly. She told my mother what I told her. She mentioned the Callaway project. She mentioned the consulting firm she worked for and how they'd been tracking that case and who I apparently was in her professional world. My mother listened. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in it reorganized, like furniture getting quietly moved in a room you know well. Patrick looked up from his conversation across the table. My sister had gone a little still. My dad had his head down, working on his entree, but his fork had slowed. Ren kept talking for another minute, and then she stopped, and there was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just full. The kind of silence that means something has happened and nobody's quite caught up to what yet. My aunt's husband Frank said, Huh. He sounded genuinely pleased, like a fishing story had just come back around to a better ending than expected. My mom said, Well, we didn't realize, you never really explained. She stopped. I waited. She started again. You always made it sound so. She stopped again. There wasn't a good ending to that sentence, and she knew it. I made it sound vague because every time I tried to explain it, no one had asked a second question. I'd kept it short because short was all they'd ever wanted. I'd stopped bringing it up because it felt like talking into a room where the acoustics didn't work. But I didn't say that. I just said it's a hard thing to explain at dinner. Which was true. And also, not the whole truth. Both things can be real. My sister reached over and touched my arm. Why didn't you ever just tell us? She asked. Not defensively, she seemed genuinely confused, a little sad. I did, I said, very quietly. A couple of times. Early on. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked down at her plate. I didn't mean it as an accusation, but I think it landed like one, a little, because she knew I wasn't wrong. Patrick said something about the Callaway acquisition. He'd read about it in a trade brief, apparently, and the conversation started up again, looser now, rerouted. Ren answered some of his questions. My dad asked one, unexpectedly, in a voice that was careful and deliberate, the way he talks when he's paying real attention. I let them ask. I answered what I was asked. I didn't perform. I didn't make anyone feel stupid for not knowing. I just talked, the same way I'd been talking before anyone was paying attention. But I noticed things. I noticed my mom refill my water glass without being asked, which she doesn't usually do. I noticed my dad use my name twice in the space of 10 minutes, which sounds like a small thing and probably is, but he'd used it maybe once all evening before that. I noticed my sister watching me with an expression I couldn't fully name, somewhere between affection and something more complicated. Regret, maybe. Or just recalibration. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the honest answer. I didn't feel vindicated in the way I'd maybe imagined on the drive down, in some back corner of my mind I wouldn't have admitted to. What I felt was something quieter and more strange. A little tired, a little relieved. Something that wasn't quite sadness but lived in the same neighborhood. The dessert came. My aunt ordered the crème brûlée. Frank got the apple thing. The conversation spread out and softened, the way it does late in a meal, when people have had enough wine and the pressure of the evening has mostly lifted. At one point, Ren leaned over again and said, quietly, "I'm sorry if that was too much." I wasn't trying to make anything weird. "You didn't," I said. I couldn't believe it. I genuinely couldn't believe it was you." I smiled. "It's okay." And it was. I meant it. Here's what I've thought about since, on the drive home and in the days after, while the evening sorted itself out in my memory into something I could actually hold. The problem was never that my family didn't love me. I think they did, in the ways they knew how. The problem was that love, without attention, starts to tell its own stories. And once a story gets told enough times, it becomes the truth, not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. Because no one has pushed back against it hard enough or with enough evidence to make the telling feel wrong. I'd let that happen. I knew I had. I'd retreated into vagueness because vagueness felt safer than trying and being brushed off again. And that had cost me something. I wasn't sure exactly what, but I felt the outline of it. Ren hadn't done anything extraordinary. She'd asked a real question and listened to a real answer. That's it. That's the whole thing. And somehow that one honest exchange had done more in 10 minutes than years of careful silence. In the car on the way home, I cried a little. Not because I was sad, not exactly, or not only, but because there's a particular feeling that comes when something you've been carrying for a long time gets put down, even briefly, even awkwardly, in the middle of a restaurant with white tablecloths and a wine list no one really needed. And it turns out that feeling is mostly relief. And relief, when it arrives late, has an edge to it. My mom called me 2 days later. She didn't apologize outright. That's not how she communicates, and I've made peace with that. But she asked me questions, real ones. She asked how long the Callaway project had taken and whether I had more work lined up and if I was doing okay out there on my own. She listened to the answers. She didn't redirect to my sister. At the end of the call, she said, "I just didn't know." I said, "I know." And I did. That's the part that doesn't make for a clean story, the part that doesn't fit neatly into the version where I was wronged and she was wrong and the dinner was a reckoning. The cleaner truth is that families accumulate their misunderstandings gradually in small deposits, and clearing them out is slow and partial, and usually a little awkward and never fully done. What I know now is that I had been playing a role in it too, the quiet one, the one who didn't explain, the one who let the story run because correcting it felt like more energy than the silence. I'm done with that, I think. Not in a dramatic way, not with any announcement. Just, I'm done retreating into fog every time someone asks what I do. I'm done treating my own work like a thing that needs to be protected from judgment by being made invisible. If people don't ask follow-up questions, that's information about them. It's not a verdict on me. The dinner didn't fix anything between me and my family. That's not how dinners work. But something shifted. I felt it, and I think they felt it too. And none of us said exactly what it was, which is probably fine. The story about me has a new chapter now. I didn't write it dramatically. I didn't write it on purpose even. Ren asked. I answered, and something that had been held in a fixed position for years moved an inch. Sometimes an inch is enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since that dinner. Not in an abstract way, in the very specific, personal way you think about things when you've had 2.5 hours alone in a car to let them settle. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing that happened that night was an accident. Not the good parts, and not the hard parts either. For years I made a choice. And it was a choice, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. To go quiet. Every time I tried to explain what I did and felt the conversation pivot away, I took that as information. I filed it under not worth trying again, and I retreated. I told myself I was protecting my energy. Maybe I was, but I was also, without fully realizing it, handing the pen to other people and letting them write the story about me. And they did. Of course they did. People fill silence with whatever narrative is already available to them, and the narrative available to my family was an old one, the one where I was the uncertain one, the one who hadn't figured it out yet. I let that run for years. That's on me. Not entirely, not only but partially, genuinely mine. And then Ren asked one real question and listened to the answer. That's the whole pivot point of the evening. One question, followed by actual attention. And what happened next wasn't magic. It was just the natural result of truth being allowed to exist in the room. That's the thing about integrity, about actually being the thing you say you are, or doing the work you say you're doing. It doesn't expire just because no one's looking at it. It accumulates quietly. The Callaway project was real whether or not my family knew it existed. My work had weight whether or not it was acknowledged at dinner tables. That part was never in question. What was in question was whether I'd ever let it be seen. I used to think that keeping quiet was a kind of strength. And maybe there's a version of that which is true. Not every room deserves your explanation. Not every skeptic is worth the energy of convincing. But there's a difference between choosing silence from a place of self-possession and retreating into it from a place of defeat. I'd crossed that line somewhere and hadn't noticed. What I know now, what that dinner actually gave me, underneath all the complicated feelings, is this: intelligence without visibility eventually becomes invisible. You can do the work, build the thing, solve the problem, and if you've trained everyone around you to not ask and not look, they simply won't. That's not cruelty, that's just how attention works. And resilience, the kind that actually matters, not the kind that's just endurance, isn't about surviving being unseen. It's about deciding at some point that you're done with it. Not dramatically, not with a speech. Just a quiet internal decision to stop colluding with the smaller version of yourself that other people have been carrying around. My dad used my name twice in 10 minutes after Ren said what she said. My mom called me 2 days later and asked real questions. That didn't happen because something in them suddenly changed. It happened because something in the room shifted when I answered honestly instead of deflecting. Small causes, real effects. That's how most things actually work. I'm not who my family thought I was, but I also wasn't fully who I knew myself to be. Not in that room, not for a long time. The dinner was the first night both of those things started to become the same person. That's enough for now. That's more than enough.